The question is that the motion be agreed to.
Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Ruth Dyson.
Mr. Speaker, can I first of all acknowledge the drivers of this legislation that we're debating today, Te Korawai o Titai o Marokura, the guardians of the Kaikoura coastal marine environment. The leadership demonstrated within that group by a variety of people, but specifically including Tamark Solomon, should be commended by everybody in this House. This process is unusual. It was actually instigated by the Honourable Chris Carter during his term as Minister of Conservation in 2005 in response to a concern from the Kaikoura residents and users of the marine environment that there was very little protection and that the legislative framework we currently operate under doesn't provide a strong opportunity for people to get together and get an agreement such as we are seeing delivered today. The report from that group was not presented for another 7 years. That's how much effort and time has gone, and not because of arguments or any deliberate slowing down. There was no filibustering going on amongst this group. It was because of a genuine need to debate issues which are hard and which are contentious. The report was provided to the then Minister of Conservation and has been delivered by the current Minister of Conservation, the Honourable Nick Smith, and I want to commend him for not just his work on this bill, but also the way that he's responded to the comments from the Select Committee. We don't always have that response from ministers, and it's really appreciated when, after the Select Committee has worked hard on an issue, that it gets a considered response from a minister. So the bill does some good things, and I think that's of course to be commended. The concerns that were raised at the Select Committee, however, in which the ministers alluded to in rather a negative fashion unnecessarily in my view, was that the agreement that has been reached is not consistent with best practice marine reserve protection, and I think that's a tension that future parliaments need to grapple with and resolve. You can legislate on top of local concerns, or you can work with local stakeholders and come up with an agreement which might be less than best practice. There may be other opportunities to promote best practice and remove some of the concerns that local people have. In this instance, it's obviously fishing. We're excluding some areas from power or cray. In particular around this area was of course of concern to local people. That's their livelihood or that's their tradition. But the marine scientists who we had appear before the Select Committee said this doesn't cut the mustard in terms of best practice. So the decision for the Select Committee was, do we go partway towards what would be the best marine sanctuary and accept the consideration of this local committee that, as I said, has been working for 7 years on this legislation, or do we say no, we'd rather hold out for best practice? I think we made the correct decision in saying we should support the hard work and commitment that has been shown by local people, particularly given our understanding that at no time were they guided towards a framework of best practice marine reserve legislation. So on that basis we support it. Mr. Speaker, I don't think that the national government should be claiming great credit for this. Actually, they haven't done any work on it at all. It's been the work of the local people, and the fact that it's coming before the House now and that it's been announced at least twice by the Minister of Conservation is really a bit of election year window dressing to make it look as if the government gives a toss about environment and conservation issues, and I don't think that their track record is very good, and I don't think their future commitments are any better. The undermining of the Department of Conservation in terms of the funding that's been allocated to it through the budget, in terms of the staffing resources, and in terms of the total absence of the advocacy role, the core role of the Department of Conservation, is a matter to be ashamed of, and I hope the Minister bows his head in that shame. There have been over 140 job losses at the Department of Conservation. They have really lost their connection with the community, and that's not a fault of any single staff member. It's because the constant restructuring and the centralisation of their functions has meant that that so important ability to understand, relate and respond to their community has gone, and we know that provincial New Zealand has been hardest hit by these cuts. In Nelson and Marlborough just this week, we've had further job losses announced. So it's really the heart of the Department of Conservation that has been cut out. We know that we have some critically endangered species which the department no longer has either the resource ability or the clout to be able to do anything about. We know in particular the issue of the critically endangered Maoi's dolphins. There are more national members of parliament than there are Maoi's dolphins, and I want to change both those figures in the coming weeks. I want the number of national members of parliament to drop, and I want the number of Maoi's dolphins to increase. The very future of that subspecies, the future of the Maoi's dolphins, is at risk because of the inability of the Minister of Conservation to stand up and speak on behalf of that critically endangered species. He's let the Minister of Fisheries just ride roughshod, not over at him on his own, but also the future of that species. We know that in the proposal for the Ruataniwha Dam, the proposal which would turn the Tukituki River toxic, the Minister of Conservation made his views so clearly known that the Department of Conservation withdrew their substantial submission in opposition to the plan change and the Ruataniwha Dam.
And second reading of this bill.
And therefore, their submission was watered down to next to nothing. So while this bill should be trumpeted, should be supported, and will certainly be by Labour, it should not be a gold star against the Minister of Conservation, who's done no work in this space. The Guardians did all this work, and at the same time he's doing so little in areas that need so much attention. Of course, the most damning aspect of the National Government's proposals has been one which has had to be put on hold, and that's their changes to the Resource Management Act. I want to put on record my appreciation to the Honourable Peter Dunn, who actually read the proposed legislation from the National Party and said National's proposals to change the RMA would gut the very principles of the Act.
We're on this,
and therefore he was not able to support it. So this bill is good, but it has to be balanced up against the bad things that are either being done, the terrible things that are not being stood up against, such as protection of the Maoi's dolphins, or the proposals that would gut the very heart of the Resource Management Act. Mr. Speaker, I just want to return to my commendation of the Guardians. It was a very unusual select committee process that we went through in Kaikoura, where we had submitter after submitter after submitter from local residents, the Ngaitahu representatives, including Tamak Solomon. We had representatives from the power industry. We had representatives from the crayfish industry, from the wider fishing industry. We had forest and bird representatives. So we had representatives from the whale watching. So a wide range of representatives from the Kaikoura community, all saying they supported this legislation. I don't think that has ever happened before. I don't think we've had what is often a very controversial proposal to have marine protection, to have exclusion of fishing from a specific area. I don't recall any time where we have had such unanimous support from the local community. This is the first whale sanctuary of its type. It is the first New Zealand fur seal sanctuary of its type. It includes 5 customary fishing areas, 2 Taiapuri and 3 Mataitai. It establishes an advisory committee, and it introduces fishing regulations that are specific to this area, and of course the overall marine reserve protection. I want to just conclude by noting in appreciation the advance notice that the Minister has given us of his intention to move a supplementary order paper which changes the review period from 25 years to 10 years. Labour will be supporting that SOP in the name of the Minister. I think it's a good move. I think the idea of having a review of these marine protected areas is sound. There must be monitoring. There must be some science behind the review so that we can look at what we have currently and what we may lose, but certainly what we will gain from this marine protection. That will give us a very solid base for the review in 10 years' time, and I look forward to it. On that basis, Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to add my support to this legislation.
I call Maggie Barry.